Well, Warren, 3 of those funds that you've just sort of assigned to the scrap heap actually top the tables in Jeff's SuperRatings tables. So, Jeff?
Look, I just disagree with Warren on the fact that just because you haven't got scale, you should get out of the game. My view, and just about every business industry in Australia, you have major players and you have small players and you have medium players, and it's a competitive environment, and you survive or die depending on how good you are. In the superannuation fund case, I think a $700 million fund can survive, provided that it has a competitive advantage or very close engagement with its membership. Those sort of things I think are critical, because and no offence to Ian, but Ian's got 1.2 million members, Damien Hill's got 1.7 million members. He's not going to be able to service those. So the smaller funds can come, like any other industry, and pick off the low-hanging fruit. They then become medium-sized funds. Eventually, possibly, they become bigger funds. So why would you just say, this is all too hard, I'm going to turn it off and merge with someone? The other thing, if your fund, and this is a statement probably for trustee directors, if your fund is now stagnant and your membership is dropping, yes, you have a problem, because you don't have any growth and you're probably going to go backwards, and you're going to get picked off by the bigger players because of their branding and marketing and everything else. But if you have a very successfully run, growing small fund, hang on to it, would be my comment.
Alex, the referee, what does he say?
I think some of these comments are a little bit bizarre. You don't get scale from the fund itself, you get scale from your service providers. And I could be a small fund with 3 people, but if I'm hanging out with super partners, I've got scale. If I'm getting my money managed through, say, Alliance Bernstein, I'm getting scale. I might have $1.50 in the bank, I've got scale because I've got big friends. You don't need to be big, you need to have big friends. It's like a schoolyard. And so this idea that we've all got to be big is bizarre. It comes down, so it therefore highlights the point, if you're big, you can get resources. Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. But it's what you do with those resources. If you want to talk about big scale and membership and all that sort of stuff, the biggest political party in Australia by membership is the National Party. Now, this is a long shot, but I'm not sure if there are too many National Party members here, and I'm not sure that they've got the best story in the world at the moment, and because of that they're really suffering. But hey, they've got scale. So all this idea that you need to be big, I think, is a bit crazy. And what I find really quite amazing is we're talking about the superannuation industry, and we seem to be totally ignoring the retail and the platform sector, which is a massively dynamic part of the market. And it's not just about industry funds. One of the biggest challenges is how do the not-for-profits and the industry funds and the public sectors and the corporates, if you like, move away from home base. That's one of the big dramas, I think, that is unfolding. And so if we're just talking about ourselves as what industry funds are going to do, that's fine, but the bigger industry funds and even the smaller ones that have got a really powerful story, they're trying to move away from home base. They're trying to go into worlds where it's now dominated by Suncorp, AXA, AMP. So a lot of this sort of homegrown, self-obsessive talk, I really think gets us nowhere. So I think we've got to just be a little bit careful of that.
Warren, getting back to your hang-up on fees, and you were talking to CIOs and fund fees and maximising them at a certain billion-dollar range, but I know actually you've got some views also about disclosure of fees and the accuracy of that to members. Do you want to sort of let us know what your thoughts are there?
Yes, absolutely. It was the third thing, if I had time today, that I wanted to talk about in my opening remarks. We think that...
that 2 minutes is still going.
So I cut it short, Michael. With fees, we think that most funds, whether they're industry funds or public sector funds or master trusts, we think that most funds are basically understating their investment costs by about 20 to 40%. Why do we say that? When we look at the the ASIC fee regulations, basically our interpretation of that is that you should show the fees of the underlying managers. Now, there are many funds here today who will invest in so-called fund of hedge fund products, and I am virtually certain that every one of you will only show a fraction of the costs of those products. Let me give you an example, just a slight little bit of mathematics. Those products basically say our objective is to earn cash plus 5% after fees. So that's basically 12%. In order for them to earn that 12%, they have to generate a gross return of about 20%. And what happens is the underlying managers take a base fee, all right, of about 2%, and then they take a performance fee of something like 20% of anything above zero, and then they've got investment costs of about 0.5, and then the headline manager takes a base fee of 1% and a performance fee of about 1%. What basically all of you and Master Trusts as well show at best is the 2% paid to the headline manager. And in fact, there's another 6% there. So in total, the fees are 8%, and the return you get is 12%. So you're paying, out of 20%, you're paying away something like 8% in fees to get 12%, but you're only disclosing 2%. That's a 6% difference. Now you think of it. If you had 10% of your fund, and many of you do, invested in these types of products, that means that you're not disclosing in the total fee about 60 basis points. If you had only 5%, it's about 30 basis points. So we think one of the fundamental problems in the industry on fee disclosure is that the fees of underlying managers in these fund type products, and it's not just kind of absolute return type products, it's private equity and infrastructure as well, to differing degrees. But what we think is that you are vastly understating the fees that you're paying to managers. And it's something that in 2003 we delivered a paper on fees at the ASFA conference, and we're arguing for it then. And we thought that what ASIC Treasury in Canberra, what ASIC had done was to ensure that the fees of the underlying managers were disclosed, but no one seems to be doing it. And I can talk to the CIOs of the largest funds in this country, and they'll sit there openly and say to me, yes, Warren, you were right, but the thing is, we don't want to be the first one to do it because we'll look so bad compared with everybody else. So you've got this mindset out there that none of you, all right, are prepared to come out and show the true fees that you're paying managers. And every single one of you that's invested in these products knows that fundamental rule that to get cash plus 5% after fees, you've got to earn about 20. And just think about it for a second. If the fund only earned 12%, those underlying managers still get their 2% base and 20% of 12, which is 2.4. They're still getting 4.4%.
Jeff, does Warren know what he's talking about?
Sorry?
Does Warren know what he's talking about, Jeff?
Yeah, sounds right. Look, how long's a piece of string? That's the problem. I mean, you've got layer after layer of investment structures within the funds. You are never going to get it right. It's a difficult one. You know, if you've got a good lawyer and a good marketer, they would go out and put another layer across the top and say it's 10 basis points. Right. Sorry, there are funds in this industry who have massive property exposure, massive alternative exposure. Their MER, the investment MER, is 20 to 30 something points. Sorry, doesn't work. Okay. You know, so it is an issue, and it's something that only probably ASIC can address.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to throw it open to the audience now to ask your favourite question. I'm sure particularly Warren, seeing he's made most of you redundant, would probably welcome some of your calls. So I think we've got some roving microphones. If we could have, yes, we have the first question up. Oh, you're just waving to me, sorry. Questions? Please, while you're thinking about it, yes, we have one up there. Because I want to, if I have time, guys, I want to ask, with conflicts of interest, how do you guys sleep at night with charging funds to review a particular function and then charging them again to rate them? It's almost like you're constructing the thing that you've got to rate beforehand, so it's getting two bites of the cherry. But nonetheless, we'll come back to that. Yes, thank you. If you could name who you are and where you're from.
Happy to name who I am. I'm Linda White from Legal Super. We represent lawyers.
We'll speak slowly, that's okay.
Well, you'll be happy to know we charge by the minute. Given what our lawyer friend yesterday said about looking to ratings agencies, and I understand that there are different ratings agencies for the way in which they rated some companies in America, do you feel somewhat uneasy in the current climate that someone might come for you eventually because of the way in which you've rated some funds?
Is that directed at anyone, or do you want us to have a crack?
Well, given that you thought lawyers were superfluous, Legal Super is always looking to create work for our members, to build our fund. We take an approach like CBUS, I suppose, invest in our industry. So,
Well, Warren, I think this question's yours, Warren.
I'm not auditioning for a space on the panel, but I am interested. Do you think that you're vulnerable?
It's a very, very good question, because I was sitting very close to where you were yesterday, and when I was listening to Patrick make those comments, I was thinking about all the money that we spent over the last few years on lawyers and the disclaimers, and I was hoping that they're in good shape. But sure, I was sitting there thinking that yes, we do have risk. We've always known that we've had risks, and yes, the short answer is it definitely made me feel uncomfortable, because there is, with litigation, it's always the lawyers come along after the event and with hindsight. And I guess it's much easier to analyse something with hindsight. And I suppose I think of it when and the people in this room will kind of understand that when you're being asked to make an investment decision, when you're actually asked to write a cheque, there are so many unknowns. You don't really know whether you should be doing this. There's great risk. And I've always thought that if an investment went poorly and the lawyers come along subsequently and you're sitting there before a judge and the judge said, well, surely you should have known this was going to happen. Surely you should have known. But that's not the way the world works, and we're in the same boat, that we do our very best to rate the funds. We exercise all the due care and diligence that we can. But I guess the worry is always that we will find ourselves one day being litigated against, and the people doing that will have the benefit of hindsight.
Yes, we have a question up here.
Philip Jones from AWS Super. Warren, I do agree it's so easy to rate somebody in hindsight once it's come and gone.
Sorry, where are you?
Just appears, sorry.
Oh,
Thank you. Just in regards to the fees on the fees on the fees, which you're talking about, members, they're worried about the bottom line. Fees on fees and high fees are great for the press. There's no doubt the press love it, the press thrive on it, just as low returns they do. But I think to show the fees in a fully disclosed manner, which the members wouldn't understand to start with, they'd have no comprehension of it, and all it's going to do is sell headlines. The other one, somebody on the opening presentation on the screen said, would you consider reversing, putting the longer term returns on the left-hand column and the shorter term returns on the right-hand column? You know, I just think it's coming back to members, which is what we're here for. I think it is a good common sense practical idea, and just what your views are on that.
I think that's actually really quite a good idea, but having said that, I was rung up by a couple of self-managed super fund investors the other day, and they were counselling me that we need to put year-to-date return figures in, because they like looking at our performance benchmarks we put up every month to compare how their portfolios are going. We've had people from the retail market say that we should be talking about Australian... We tend to talk about default funds, then we talk about diversified growth, balance, then into the asset sectors. And so people in the retail market have been saying, no, you should put the default stuff down the arse end of all the tables. And it sort of comes down to, you can do it a million ways, and yeah, we could have a crack at it, but we'll then find that members will be ringing us up saying, you keep changing the formats all the time, it's going to be confusing. I think members are smarter than seeing something in the first column versus the third column. I mean, not everyone watches Current Affair.
Okay. Next question.
Richard Stoddard from MTAA Super Fund. My question was to Jeff. I think you were right on the money about your comments regarding administration platforms and the relationship between trustees and the administration platforms, and the fact that we might be suffering a substandard service because of the lack of funds coming from the trustees. But I'm intrigued by the fact that SuperRatings rate funds on their administration as well as all other aspects of their operation. Does their platinum rating depend on partly being rated on their administration platform? And if it does, wouldn't it encourage trustees to pay more money to the administration platform if that was at risk?
Well, the short answer is, yeah, the administration is a key component of the overall rating of the fund. Just because you don't have excellent administration, I'm not saying that in respect to MTAA, just saying it as a generalisation, doesn't mean you can't achieve platinum status. Look, for all funds, we've got a range. The way we score them is in road signs, but 40, 60, 80 is a very common result for administration platforms. So you don't need perfect admin to get a platinum rating in the same way as you don't need the lowest fees to get a platinum rating. It's a combination of all of the issues together that brings up whether or not you're in the top 15% of super funds in Australia.
If you're talking about administration, I think we also need to take a bit of a 30,000-foot health check view here. According to a report just put out by the research group Investment Trends, the platform sector spent $65 million last year upgrading their platforms and beefing up their administration. And I don't know what sort of money the not-for-profit administrators are doing, but something tells me it's nowhere near that figure. And when we start talking about administration, you need to go and have a chat, because it'll scare the living daylights out of you, as it does to me. You have a talk to the functionality some of the platforms are delivering to their high-end retail clients and to their shoe leather, being their advisors out there. And some of the things that is now just taken for granted is just absolutely amazing. And industry fund administrators could spend 10 times what they're spending now, and I don't think they'd come within a bull's roar of it. But I also think that comes down to the point of, well, so what? We have members contacting us and employers contacting us and saying, oh, like, I've got money with an industry fund, I love the returns, the insurance is fantastic, but they left me waiting on the phone for 3 hours from the employer call centre. And we'll say to them, look, that's the price you pay for being in some of these low-cost funds. When you have 850,000 members, you cannot respond to them personally all the time. It is really, really difficult. If you want that, you're then going to have to just pay for personal advice, personal counsel. And I think part of it, this reinforces the storytelling idea. If our fund is trying to convince our members that for $1.50 a week or whatever it should be, that we're going to provide that massive high-touch service, well, we're just not going to do it. We're delivering something fundamentally different, which is why I love it when we'll have, say, and this is an example I use, I'm not picking on these funds, but Cbus versus Asgard. You couldn't get two fundamentally different funds in the universe. They are both excellent at doing what they do, but what they do is so different. And I find it just amazing when people try and compare them. They are just chalk and cheese, doesn't even go near it. Now, the service I'm going to get from Cbus is not going to be what I get from Asgard. If I got the Cbus service from Asgard, I'll be pretty unhappy. But they are excellent funds, but they are servicing different parts of the market for different members in different ways. And so when we start talking about administration, let's sort of have a bit of a think about what we're actually talking about here. Because most of you industry funds out there, you're not actually competing with each other, you're competing with the platform sector. And if you want to then get into that space, you're going to start working out how to talk to these evil people called financial planners. And I must admit, we started working with a lot of financial planners. I think I've fallen in love all over again. When you actually chat to these people, it's a fundamentally different conversation to what you're used to. And when you start to get behind a lot of the rhetoric and all this sort of stuff that's fun in the industry, you start to realise what they actually worry about. And if industry funds can get their story together, I think they've got a very compelling argument. We've got to get beyond the tribal warfare, but that will happen sooner or later. But when you start dealing with trying to get the message out to those groups of people, the debates we're having in industry fund land, not-for-profit land about administration, well, quite frankly, who cares?
Thanks, Alex. Last question, thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Michael Chair from Mallisons in Sydney. Just a quick comment and question to any of the panel members. Just in relation to Warrant's commentary in relation to disclosure being an exercise in revenue for lawyers necessarily, I must say that I don't think you'd be surprised, or perhaps you would be surprised here, that I, for one, as a lawyer, agree in the sense that those disclosure documents do nothing other than actually act as a risk minimisation strategy for trustees who issue them, have to put their name and their brand on them. But I don't think that's necessarily a criticism of the lawyers that are actually reviewing them on behalf of the trustees in this room. It's more about our policymakers and the legislator who sets up this framework within which we have to operate. And I think if that is a valid criticism, and it probably is, I don't think anyone's going to disagree that they become useless as an education tool. They're more about risk management. And the reason why trustees go to their lawyers is to make sure that they've got it right and there are no liability issues for them in issuing it in the market space. And perhaps tomorrow when the Minister's here, we can actually raise the concern and we can make it clear that, on the disclosure front, if they're designed to be educative tools, we've missed the plot completely. And I'd be hard-pressed to sort of find a lawyer, anywhere in the country that works in this space that would say, we love it as it is and the documents are serving their purpose, because they're not. So just wanted to make that comment. But the question I have is, as I sit here listening to the three of you, I'm curious to understand...
I don't believe you're a lawyer. Not with a question like that.
The question I have is one about regulation of rating agencies, because as far as I understand, unless I'm missing something, it's non-existent. And you don't come under the purview of APRA or ASIC. You don't necessarily have legislation that governs the way in which you have to produce your reports necessarily. I'm just curious to see what you think would be, whether there's any merit in such a concept necessarily, or whether there's any merit in having a standard for which you guys have to apply, I guess, your ratings and your research as you produce in particular industry sectors. And in our case, it's for the super industry.
I'll jump in first. A couple of issues there. One of the bugbears with dealing with ASIC is that, as far as I understand, they don't work on precedent. And so Fund A could be sitting over here, they could come up with a really cool way of doing things. But if another fund tries to do the same thing, they will say, oh yeah, but these guys weren't held up. ASIC didn't jump on them, so I'll try and do the same thing. And then suddenly they'll find they're the ones getting a hard time. And I think that gives everyone a real feeling of paranoia, which is quite justified. So if we could sort of move along down the road of precedent, I think it will go a long way. That was rammed home to me, I think, when Virgin Super came along. They had their bright red small little B5 booklet. And a few trustee groups came to see us, and they were adamant that Virgin was breaking the rules. As it turned out, the next Tuesday, I was giving a presentation to some friends of mine that I used to work with in Canberra, who now work in the Superannuation Division of Treasury. We're chatting about all these wonderful, fascinating topics. I showed them the Virgin PDS. I just happened to have it with me because I just loved it so much. And they grabbed it like they were grabbing a pornography book from Fisherwick. And they were passing it around and showing each other pictures. And at the end, one of the senior dudes came up and said, look, Alex, I told this industry that you could do a simple PDS and none of them believed me. These guys have done it. But if someone else had come along and said, well, let's go for one of those, but let's make it blue, ASIC probably would have come down and just sort of trod on them like a ton of bricks. In terms of the second part about should rating agencies be regulated, whatever, my view is, of course not. I love not being regulated.
Thanks, Alex. Warren?
But the big issue that we're missing, this is what we should be talking about today. In the Daily Telegraph, I was sitting in a Wagga cafe on Sunday afternoon.
As you do.
Big story. 1 woman and 6 dress sizes. Why don't we, let's regulate rating agencies, but why is it that you can walk into a girl's boutique, not that I do anymore, pick up a dress, and if it says size 12, that can actually mean anything from size 8 up to size 20. So let's regulate rating agencies, but let's regulate dress shops too. Big issue, big issue.
Warren? Should you be governed? Are you self-managed?
Yeah. Look, first of all, being regulated, I think would probably be a good thing. It would probably give all of you people a lot more confidence. For our part, we've always, when I set up the business in 1997, I went and got a dealer's license, had an unrestricted dealer's license. And when the new regime came in, that was really converted to the new license, and we have the ability to give advice to wholesale clients and retail clients. We tend not to, we choose not to give advice to retail clients, but we have the license there in case we're ever caught out inadvertently giving advice to retail clients, and one day we may want to do that. So we sort of feel that, just like many of you have an ASIC licence, so do we. We take it extremely seriously, and we try to comply with it in every way, shape or form. If it was deemed to be a good thing to have us regulated, I wouldn't oppose that in any way, shape or form.
The one thing, if regulating rating
Alex,
agencies...
you've had your
hang on. That doesn't mean that we should all do it the same way. So I'm assuming that's not where the question's going, but every now and again we get said, how come you guys don't do everything exactly the same way? Because my question is always in reply, why don't you run all your funds in the same way? Because that's actually, that, if you're trying to address that uniformity, that standardisation thing, it's not, that won't actually address that problem.
Thanks, Alex. Jeff?
Look, I think that we've also got a FSL, and I think that's important. I think, well, Warren and I do. I think you've got an exemption, Alex. Is that right?
Yep.
Yep. Exemption because of publication, which that's fine. I mean, do we need regulation? If someone can point out where we've got problems, I'll go down that track. But I haven't heard anything, aside from discussion points, which we respond to when required. I don't see the need for regulation. I'll happily comply with it, but I just don't see the need.
Gentlemen, summing up, because we've got time constraints on us, but if I could just go to each of you for one short, succinct statement, which in itself will be a major achievement, but if you had to say one single thing that we had to focus on for the coming 12-month period, what would it be? And I'll let you... Alex, you go first.
Get your story straight.
Thank you.
I think you have to find a way to engage with, that advisory, those 15,000 advisors.
Okay, my preference, and it's not something you can do, it's something I hope you will be able to do, is that the government says free up all of this intra-fund advice to allow you to do it without financial planning or without SOAs. That would be the ideal scenario.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had an outstanding session. Would you thank our guest speakers for it?